All right, we'll call this meeting to order. Bailey, can we get a roll call?
Commissioner Lorge.
Here.
Commissioner Husnick.
Here.
Commissioner Huntosh.
Here.
Commissioner Roberts.
Here.
Commissioner Finneman.
Here.
Commissioner Archer.
Here.
And Mayor Winnick.
Here. Ask everyone to rise for Pledge of Allegiance. If they can. Take your time. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, welcome everyone. I'll look for an approval of the agenda.
I so move.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All right. And now, approval of the minutes from the July 9th meeting.
I would move to approve.
All right, do we have a second on that?
I'll second.
Okay,
Whoever wants.
whoever you want to mark down, get a second or third for that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Against? And abstain.
Abstain.
One abstain. Thank you. Dan, do you want to take us through the budget discussion?
Sure, President, members of the EDA, can you just come here quick? So it's budget time of year. We've been going through all the other budget items through the different parts of City of Forest Lake, and part of this discussion is kind of the, let's have a discussion on the potential 19 budget for the EDA. So before I kind of dive into the numbers here, the spreadsheet that was sent out on Friday in the packet basically took 18's number and just kind of lined them over to 19 as kind of a placeholder numbers. I do have an update, which is the paper that's in front of you right now, kind of the long legal piece of paper. I actually went through and took some of those work plan items and actually kind of carved them apart and actually put them in an actual part of the budget, so they're not just kind of in there as a big line item, so we can kind of see how they interplay with other parts of the budget. So as we kind of go through the discussion, kind of refer back to that sheet that's on the dais in front of you rather than the information that's in the packet. I also do have a summary of that in this presentation here as well. Just kind of looking at it, so basically the 2018 budget for the EDA, there was an increase in the budget amount from 17 to 18, and the total budget amount for 18 was $53,490, and then the 2019 budget, as I have it presented here, is $53,682. So substantially, pretty much just a one-to-one transfer the numbers over to 19's budget line items. When I looked at the 2019 anticipated cost, what I did was I went back through the work plan to make sure, since we approved the work plan, and I wanted to take a look at what the funding implications of that work plan would be in 19, and kind of took out some of the higher level ones that we had kind of assigned a rough cost to. First one was the buy local campaign. We had a cost assigned to that one of $5,000. The downtown business initiative in the work plan is $15,000, that's the goal, to get 3 businesses signed up for the incentive program. The new tracks is also a new item from 18, and I made the assumption that would continue into 19. And then I also anticipated the potential for another grant match from the Washington County CDA. So I just put another $2,000 in there for that. Looked at that total, approximately $40,000 worth of budget expense. And that was, when I kind of looked at that and I kind of plugged those numbers in, we did kind of go over the existing budget by approximately $5,000, the way it was currently laid out. So I made some adjustments. The major adjustment I did was I decreased the downtown business incentive program from $15,000 down to $10,000. I kept the buy local campaign in there for $5,000. That expense could be pushed into this year's budget though, and not into 19's budget. So that $5,000, if we ended up having to say 3 initiatives, incentives come forward, that money could get kind of transferred over. Some of this stuff is just kind of placeholder, so we could kind of still work within that pool of money. I just tried to kind of slot it into different spots. Kept the new tracks estimate at the same, and the CDA grant at the same, and I came up with a total of $35,000 there. I guess kind of before we go into the spreadsheet, just a couple of things to kind of help guide the conversation is, first of all, is the EDA kind of comfortable with the current budget levels that are presented there? More or less, just kind of seeing where you guys are temperature-wise on the current budget. And then additionally, are there any additional programs you'd like to see evaluated for 2019 that aren't included in that work plan? when I look back, kind of given the fact that that work plan was just approved, I figured that we did a pretty exhaustive look at what we were looking at, from an initiative standpoint. I think in 19, when I kind of reviewed it again, there wouldn't be a lot of work plan items that would be probably 100% completed in 19. A lot of progress will be made in 19, but we're probably, just based on the workload that's in there, there's enough work to kind of get us through the end of 18 and through 19. And then halfway through 19, kind of do another evaluation. But just kind of as we kind of get into the budget numbers, just keep that in the back of your mind too. Is there any other programs that you'd like to kind of see, or evaluated for 19? So here, and it's probably a little bit difficult to see on some of your monitors here, but this is basically just the budget that's in front of you on paper here, just up on the screen. A couple of things, when I looked through and made some adjustments here, as you can see, I did under contract services, I plugged in the new tracks amount, so I actually split that out of, and give it its own, placeholder there. I put the 5,000 for the buy local campaign into publishing and ads, since that could potentially be, paper-driven, brochure-driven, or even digital-driven campaign. I did throw that right into that line item there. And then under miscellaneous, I put the 10,000 for the downtown initiative. One thing I did do is I did reduce the professional services from 6,800 down to 1,800. I haven't seen any demand come through as of this far into 17 for it, so I feel pretty confident that we'd be okay with that reduction in professional services. I did keep the engineering charges at 5,000. Part of that is the fact that if we do come up with a Washington County, a grant match, we could pull out of that $5,000 that's in there for engineering services. And then I initially, when I looked at this, I thought, we could potentially reduce legal services. But then as I kind of started thinking through what we could potentially use legal services for, if we kind of get some of these programs kind of launched, we may need legal review. So I kind of kept that number in there, and then we can always adjust that kind of mid-year if we're looking at, hey, we're way under budget for legal services. We can kind of slot that money somewhere else. So when I kind of made those adjustments, I was able to come back with the numbers, basically the same from 18 into 19, with those adjustments that are there. And again, there is still some flexibility within this number set where all of a sudden halfway through the year we're seeing, another initiative come forward, an incentive come forward that we need to find $5,000 from. We could, basically, kind of take from some of these other line items to make up for that difference. So this is just kind of a starting point, and I guess at this point, just kind of looking for some feedback on it as presented, if there's anything else you kind of want to see changed or added to it, and I'm just kind of looking for EDA feedback at this point.
All right. Go ahead, Judy.
Is that 18,000 for new tracks? Is that for the full year?
Yeah, that's the full year. That's the full year amount, correct.
But I was going to ask that too, because, currently we're looking at just $2,000 or 2,200 so far. But, we're estimating this year is going to be, about 10, 12,000 at least? Or? Yeah,
and we started late this year. We started at end of April, so that doesn't include the full, so there would be no charges from January through April in there. And again, I looked at that 18,412 was taken off the contract that was signed from New Tracks. If you took out that 18,412, and it was estimated because depending upon mileage, I could go up or down a little bit, but that's going to be pretty close to what they're going to come in at if we do it for the full 12 months in 19.
Okay.
And is that something we had voted and approved for all of 2019?
No,
I don't.
Just this year.
Yeah, so, but it's on the ledger for next year. And I keep falling back into that category like I did last time, that it's not a social arrangement that I would challenge. It's a social service. It's valuable, so I'm not sitting here challenging the idea of it. But the economic benefit that comes with it is really minuscule. And so here we're an economic development authority, and I'm still looking for some way to save money for an economic development initiative by seeing if somebody else will help share us this cost. I know it's a city budget item and you can shift pockets, but for the most part, I have no way to argue the 53,632. I don't know how to ask for any more, change that story. That seems to be something that's born of history. But I do have a challenge to a couple things. One is whether someone will help support the new tracks so that it's not all out of economic development. And the other one is I'll challenge later the buy local campaign. So my general thesis is there's a lot of unknowns in economic development, and you should have a cachet available, and you should be able to respond to things that happen. And these are two items that I think should be talked about.
I thought we were looking at splitting new tracks with the city. Didn't we talk about that?
We probably talked about it, but I don't know if there's any action that's been taken.
I think we're gonna evaluate it towards the end of the year.
Yeah, we're waiting to get some data back on ridership before we can make any evaluation on the benefit of it anyway.
But when you think about the economic benefit, truly, you gotta look at that as saying it's not a big score on the economic side of life.
Plus, it's almost a third of our budget.
It's a big chore on our part to put that in, so. So I have my hesitation regarding that. I'll talk about local incentives next, or later. But outside of that, I guess I just have one more confusing point that I'm still awkward about. We have it's been said different ways, so it makes me confused. Deliverables for the promote downtown revitalization, tax abatement. To me, tax abatement's always been, when tax time comes, you abate their taxes to that amount. It didn't mean money came out of somebody's pocket to do that. And then the other one is $5,000 per business. So many businesses will help promote with dollars in. So I'd like to have clarification of those two items. Are they separate items? Are we doing both?
Well, if you reduce the number coming in by 5,000, you gotta mark that somewhere. It's, you're right. I mean, an abatement means they don't have to pay the $5,000, but we would need to, city coffers go down by 5,000, so you gotta adjust that. Basically it was an unfunded mandate before where somebody came in for the abatement process, the city goes down by 5,000. This at least acknowledges the fact that there is potential expense, because that has to get charged somewhere,
Or otherwise you just get less taxes?
which is a reduction in, so we don't necessarily know. So if we budget out, say.
Budgeting to pay for that.
Yeah, so if we're budgeting out, say if we're budgeting $100 of tax revenue, and all of a sudden mid-year we do an abatement for $5, we gotta figure out a $5 adjustment somewhere in the budget because our revenues are gonna go down by $5. So that's where this money would then get transferred over to make up for that.
Robbing Peter to pay Paul.
I mean, in essence, but we're at least acknowledging the fact that we're anticipating that expense to happen. So if our revenues do come in low on the tax revenue side, we can just take that money and put it over there. And then we're kind of also establishing a cap for it. We're not just gonna say that it's open, we're not gonna try to get 50,000 in 1 year. We're gonna try to do 10, see what the response is. If we get another one and it's a great evaluation, we still have budget, we can adjust that number to get that third
So
one.
it's a singular item, not two items, and it's still out of EDA's pocket.
Correct.
And it'll come out of our EDA pocket at tax time, or now? As soon as we say, we're gonna give you 5 abatement, they get 5 abatement, cash.
Once it's approved, yeah, they get the abatement.
Don't get any.
They don't get it. It's
That's
just
what I'm thinking, tax abatement just
subtracted.
happens, so we're paying back the city
City pays.
at the tax time. Okay, so it's not money out as these things happen, this is money out at tax time.
Correct.
Okay, I got you now.
Yeah, and what's been the incentive for that? I mean, has there been a lot of demand for that downtown incentive?
There was initially, there was kind of a bigger push for it. It seemed, when we started having conversation at the EDA level, there was a little bit of a resurgence for it that came up through downtown, and then it's just kind of, gone back a little bit quiet again. It seems like one of the reasons I think initially there was a lot of feedback on it was that we actually had one of the seasonals go through downtown and hand out flyers, and they actually papered the downtown areas with information on it because it was a brand new program, and then we got a couple that way, and it seems like when this thing kind of, when it kind of rises to the top of a work plan item, people kind of respond back to it, and then they kind of realize, do I qualify? Then they kind of look at the parameters and they say, my project might not qualify for it, so it kind of ebbs and flows, but as of right now, it's kind of gone back quiet. I haven't heard of any increase in the past probably 3 to 4 weeks. When it first came, as we're going through the work plan, I probably got 3, within a week.
And there is a cap, it's a literal 5,000 if you spend 40 plus.
Yeah, there's a
And
formula.
so, yeah, I'm still caught with the fact that one did not preclude the other. The 40,000 probably would have been spent as an extra little frosting on the game. They'd love to see the city participate, and that's cool. Is it a flexible game? Can it be, let's just say there was a great project, and it took 10,000 out of the 10 for 1 year. Would it be possible to keep that a flexible proposition?
I think it's capped at 5,000 per parcel, so you
Yeah.
couldn't combine two, because I think that was the intent. You didn't want one project to come in and put all that money into one project because we're trying to spread it across the entire, as much as you could through the downtown. I think what you could potentially look at, and I had to go back to the actual documents and review it quicker, or a little bit more closer, was if the project cost came in at, say, 25,000, so you're not at that 40,000 cap, could you reduce that 5,000 down you know, on the same scale, so you're getting 3,000 or 2,000. I don't know that for sure, I have to go back and confirm that, but I think the intent with that $40,000 was basically you don't want to have somebody to come in to do like a $5,001 incentive, or, you know, they put 2 windows in for $5,000, and then they're asking us for abatement costs to take care of that. So I think it was kind of, you wanted to make kind of a bigger project, so to speak, to give the tax abatement.
So the flexibility would come into a situation where, if you looked at these budget items as being literal and set, then we have some $13,000 something left over in our budget that we can apply without any kind of constraints at this point in time.
If, like, assuming like nothing comes forward next year for the downtown incentive?
Well, no, even if you paid for your 10,000 per 2 incentive programs per year.
I guess I'm a little bit confused, where do you get the?
And the totality of the budget.
Yeah, the total budget we have is 50-something. And when you take away all these things we've already talked about, even the new tracks and everything else with no support, we're in the category of $13,000 within our budget allowance for the time. So that's what we get to work with. Should something's gonna come along, folks, you know, there's gonna be this new dimension of something to talk about and deal with. So if it's only gonna come from our budget, we have about 13,000 left to be discretionary about.
Well, I think the way that this is described right here, this is actually showing a balance from what the funding level is to what the requests are. So like, to your point, if you want the flexibility, if something comes up, you can make the decision halfway through saying, okay, you know, we have this kind of a new initiative that comes forward, it costs $7,000. We haven't given out any downtown incentive funding. So rather than,
Okay.
you know, do a downtown incentive funding, let's do the other funding. Or it could also be, you know, in February, a great, you know, program comes forward, you can say, well, we haven't really fully gone down the path of the buy local campaign, let's pull that $5,000 off and put that to the other amount. So you do have some flexibility in terms of what
Understood.
comes forward. You just don't want all of a sudden have the $7,000 come forward and you've already allocated $5,000 for the buy local. You'd have at that point, then you'd be over budget by the difference. So you have, you know, some numbers, you have some flexibility in there, but at least this point kind of sets up where, you know, going back to the work plan, it kind of sets you those check marks. At the end of the year, you can say, you know what, we had $50,000 to work with, we got new tracks paid for, we got 2 downtown initiatives, we had a buy local campaign. That's kind of what we let out with, so you kind of have a focused effort. And then midway through the year, you don't know what is gonna come up. And, you know, you could also see midway through the year that legal services, you know what, we've had no legal problems for the first half of the year, so we're at $4,000. We can say, we're fairly comfortable at this point saying we can take $2,000 of that legal and put it to something else. Or engineering isn't coming, and we have no projects on the horizon that requires engineering services, so we can take some of that money, you know, and reallocate it.
Understood. What it does is cause me to cycle around again, saying, I'm back to my protective measure of saying, can somebody help us on new tracks? And I'll talk later about local campaigning, local services. I'm just trying to save, again, more of a cachet there for things that are purely economic development oriented.
All right, I got a couple of questions for you, Dan. Last year, we had extensive amount of legal due to the litigation with this building. And so that was budgeted knowing we would have that. But going forward, I don't know if we need to budget that much. But building on that, I look at, you know, these smaller budget amounts for legal services, for engineering, for professional services, for seminar and training, contract services. Can't we just put that into one line item rather than having to break it out and doing all the accounting and, you know, one over, one under? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, you can, but what ends up happening is that it's kind of like when I first looked at the budget that was presented on a Friday, you kind of look at the totals, and if you don't really have a guide to how that's gonna at least get split, I mean, at least some sort of roadmap to say, you know, we anticipate legal costs, you're basically kind of, you know, because you can always just kind of budget on this total 36,967, as long as you're underneath that, you're okay. And I think, at least as, so when I kind of reran the numbers, all of a sudden I kind of found out that if we need to do a $4,000 for legal and a $15,000 for the buy local, then that $56,000 that was originally there is no longer valid, you have to go to 61. So I mean, you can, I guess, you know, kind of keep the numbers under that 36, and how it gets split up between these as the budget evolves is kind of, that's an option, but you at least want to put a number in there so you kind of have an idea of where you are, because when you start to get to legal at 3,300, you could say, what do we, you know, kind of prevents the actual cost versus kind of like the niceties. If we're doing an evaluation of what's the legal feasibility of X, Y, or Z, that exploratory work might not get done if we're already at budget for, you know, for the year.
Well, I see you keeping those divisions, because they seem pretty profound divisions.
Well, within the fund, so I mean, I guess it's not to pick on, legal services, but you're kind of using them as the example. So let's just say you have, midway through the year, we have another case that we have to go back for the roof awning again, and say our legal expenses are at $2,200. So that's a hard cost in there. Then all of a sudden, we also want to explore the option of, developing some type of new lease agreement for a business park. Well, there's legal costs that are associated with the review, with the drafting, with all that other stuff on them. You can say, okay, for city attorney, how much would this cost in X amount, to do this type of work? And they could say, well, it's gonna cost you $3,000. Well, then you combine that with what you've already spent on the legal service. You can say, I've blown my legal budget, which is fine if you then go, well, I'm way underneath on seminars and training, so I can take that extra from there. But then that kind of gives you the guide of, I'm not gonna go to a seminar training and spend my legal and spend this. It kind of keeps you in line throughout the whole year.
I personally like it broken down to, because then you can choose which bucket you're pulling from, and,
I do too.
and it gives you a budget versus actual. So you can, you can make sure you're aligning correctly with, the path that you're going and perceived costs moving forward. So I personally like it that way. It just makes it, I think it makes it cleaner and easier for me to see. Otherwise, it's kind of like a free-for-all. It's like one big bucket, and
I
who
do
knows
too.
whose hands are in the bucket.
Next question I have for you is the downtown incentive program. Is that going into, if it's not used within the year, is that going into a fund? I thought we were trying to build up a fund for that.
I could touch base with Hannah on that to find out what actually happens to that, because I could see if we can do a transfer at the council level to put that in its own fund, so we would have those in reserves to build up. So I mean, at one point you would be getting, I would anticipate at some point that one year you could have a lot of demand for that, for that particular program. So I can ask Hannah about, how you could get it set up to allow that to happen.
Okay.
Got a question on new tracks. We're funded through the end of the year, January 1st. So at what point do we approach the city so they can get it on their budget? If we decide to go ahead and we want 9,000 matched by the city, and then we can add 9,000 back in on ours. What point do we do that?
Before September, anyway. That's when we have our basic
Budget
budget
is September?
discussions. Yeah.
So when do we evaluate new tracks? Do we wait? We can't wait if we
Well,
want to get on the
when are we
city
set for an
budget.
evaluation from new tracks?
I'll reach out to New Tracks to get the evaluation. I think, with the New Tracks funding, I guess if you were gonna bring forward saying, the funding mechanism, I guess, what's the proposal for the extra 9,000? I mean, that's kind of the question that my assumption would be council would ask, is that, if you're gonna take and reduce it by 9,000, not that it's a bad idea, it's just in lieu of what, what else are we gonna fund with that 9,000? There's another initiative, another incentive, or we just wanna keep it on the books in case something comes up,
But if this is our time to recommend, based on what we're seeing, then maybe our recommendation could be, we'll go half, and we'd like some other city pocket to go half.
No, and I don't disagree. I'm just saying if you're gonna go at half, if so, by allowing that cut in the basically reducing that expense line item from 18,000 to 9,000, that allows $9,000 within the current funding mechanism to be there. What's the anticipated use of that 9,000? Because, the other option would be, in theory would be if you're gonna cut it by, again, half, and you just reduce the funding in half and you're still left with the same. All I'm just trying to say is if the question comes up, what is the EDA gonna do?
You lose it.
Is reserves a category? And it cannot, Mayor, we were talking about it possibly rolling over into the following year, but that's a category.
We gotta have a specific fund and a specific purpose, otherwise anything that's left over is gonna go into the general fund.
So the
We
EDA
can't,
has no cachet reserve kind of category.
nobody in the city does. It's gotta have a specific fund, a water fund, a sewer fund. It's gotta be designated for something, capital improvement fund, but we can't just stockpile that money.
We could shift it over to one of these other categories if we chose to.
Yeah,
Save it, just to pull it in.
Just, yeah, because I guess, things come up, that we've, over the years, the ambassador program, helping with the 4th of July, different things that we have not even on our radar right now. So how do we, what you're saying is how do we reserve that so that it can stay if we do decide to cut the new tracks? 'Cause I think it seems like the consensus is that until, obviously, we gotta get the numbers back, but maybe this isn't you know, for us to fully fund that, looks like and it doesn't have to be the city, it could be a Rotary Club, a Lions Club, or some other civic organization, or some other, you know, place out there that would be able to do stuff, because that's what, you know, down in White Bear, I think they've said they got some funding from different civic organizations, so, but in the meantime, holding that in a fund that's, I guess, I don't know what you would name it, but as we all know, things have come up to us, and, you know, and you gotta react at it, but if we've already spent it, we already have the budget, then for someone to come and propose, saying, hey, we'd like to do a study, it's gonna cost X amount, well, we don't have the money, you know, so it's tough to, so.
That's what I'm pushing, yeah.
Well, are there other things, you know, besides new tracks and a circulator bus? But, you know, some of the items that you brought up, whether it's helping to participate with the 4th of July beyond what the city's doing now, or, you know, other things, maybe we create not a you know, it's in contract services. So, yeah, we could have a budget with, you know, multiple things that we're doing. It's just, you know, having those ideas ahead of time and, you know, reasonable numbers for them.
I certainly would like to, you know, push the idea of splitting the cost somewhere and finding a category where we can place that funding that's accessible, whether it be a category like Downtown Business Improvement Incentive Program with taking some of the cap off, so that's a flexible thing. We don't have to spend it. Sorry, we don't have to spend it, but we could have it available. And downtown improvement might be a category. There might be another category that we just simply tie into. I know the mayor was saying let's get less categories, but if there was one that was just somehow a holding position.
Miscellaneous looks.
Miscellaneous, I was gonna say, that's probably, I mean, if you look, you know, the budget in 17, or in, excuse me, in 18, you know, is a pretty big miscellaneous, it's 25,000 that was sitting in miscellaneous, you know, to kind of account for that. You know, I guess the recommendation I would have is that if you're asking for a cost participation, you know, my opinion of that is that then you have another competing interest that says this is, you know, we'd rather take this 9,000 and put it, and at this point, what I'm kind of hearing is that we kind of want to reserve that for something that we don't know what's going to, you know, there's unknowns that are in there that are going to come up.
Right, the
you
new
know.
tracks thing came up kind of out of nowhere, and before we had a budget, so we had money there to do something for this year, so.
You know, and I think part of that too is like if you kind of look back, I mean, I think some of it too is that we kind of have that 2-year work plan, you know, which is again, I mean, it doesn't look like a lot, but there's actually a lot of back end work that needs to be done on that work plan, you know, and I think this budget allows that finance work to happen, you know, to kind of finance that type of work. You know, in terms of the, you know, another program, I mean, there is a little bit, I mean, is it realistic that 5,000 for engineering charges is going to happen in 19? You know, if we're kind of focusing on laying the groundwork and trying to accomplish some of the work plan items, they're probably going to come in lower than that. You know, reality is, I think there's already a little bit of buffer built into this budget the way it currently sits. You know, and I just worry about all of a sudden throwing another $9,000 or $10,000 on top of that, and then all of a sudden at the end of the year you have a budget for 56,000 and our expenses come in at 32, and then it's going to look at, you know, if I'm developing a budget and I've seen the EDA come back 2 years in a row significantly under budget, I'm going to be like, well, you have way too much revenue coming in, so that revenue can get spent somewhere else. Like Public Works needs it for road improvements, and you take that money, or you lose it. Right. So I mean, I don't disagree that something could come up. I think there's a little bit of buffer built into these that we could account small.
I hate reading another category, you know, so that's why I'm tending to say, plan it someplace. The CDA grants, it's easy to see where we might go after two, and it might have been more the, you know, the higher brow one rather than the low one. So 2,000 set aside for that. We actually could set aside more for that and hold a piece of it there and hold a piece of it someplace else in downtown business improvements. And we now have not this big one lump sum. We've spread it out a bit, and we're not rating something we don't understand, which is the other legal and other kind of categories. If we can raid those, it's a terrible word, I'm sorry, raid those later, then that's one thing that could happen. But just to have it in a category when I think already the CDA grants are small and the downtown business incentive could be bolstered, and maybe we don't use it, and then at the end of the year, what do we have to do? Hustle like the private company does and spend it somehow.
Right, but I think the
Companies don't do it that way. Just government spends it all, or it gets taken away.
You get to zero.
I mean, I think the key is too, is like, as you look at another program that comes in, you know, and it could be a very good program that comes in, say, March, you know, and at that point, that's the analysis work that the ED should do, is look at it, is this program gonna allow for more economic development than, say, a $5,000 business incentive for the same price? And then that's kind of and it may end up, that program does, so then you basically maybe not do the development initiative. But then if all of a sudden you're getting great incentive programs coming in, you can always go back to the council and say, you know what, we're kind of seeing a lot of activity here. Can we see if we can do something to within the current city budget to reallocate money back? I mean, not that is viable, but I'm just kind of thinking is that I don't really would like to, I guess I wouldn't recommend, just for the sake of cutting 9,000, is to bring forward a budget cut of 9,000 unless we have a very good kind of plan for that 9,000. I mean, that's just, for me, it's good budget management to come forward and say, we have $9,000, we're gonna do a X study that's gonna give us this incentive. But at this point, you're right, it's tough to kind of know that because we haven't done that. We haven't gone out to the market to see what the needs are. But we kind of have a little bit of a roadmap through our work plan. And if I wasn't able to fund the work plan initiatives, I would be probably more in line with saying we need to put money in the miscellaneous accounts. But I think by having our work plan kind of funded through this, the major items anyway, and the other reality of it is too, is that if we get a buy local campaign, if that's, funded in 18, we may not need that 5,000 in 19, because we could have already basically extended that money in 18, and that program's up and launched and ready to go, and it just needs some tending money, which could come out of the 5,000 to kind of keep it going.
Okay, I got a question. If we leave the new tracks at 18,000, can we approach the city then and ask for 9,000 for the coming year? And then when the coming year comes, only spend 9, and then we've got the 9 left over? And at that time, we've got months down the line, things have come along and we can decide how to spend it?
Kind of the same thing.
I think that's what they're kind of trying to figure out.
Yeah, I mean,
But we'd leave it, we wouldn't need a new
Yeah.
category now.
No. I almost think it may be the best, a potential way to do this would be is to leave the 18,000 in there and all of a sudden say in July, you spent the 9,000 and we're competing against this great development initiative that comes forward. Then you go to the council and say, look, here's this great business incentive, here's the merits of this program, here's what we're gonna get out of it, the cost is $7,000. But within our current budget, we're cutting the new tracks, can we get some assistance at that point? So now we have a project that goes with the funding, or is the council willing to fund this extra project? So it doesn't necessarily have to come from the EDA. The EDA will manage it, but the funding source comes from somewhere else. That's, it's a known on a known right now, it's kind of an unknown, and, that's tough to basically.
This was our chance to control our particular group's budget. Being beholden to the city council at some later date for this unknown prospect, again, if it's just a $9,000 category and can't be expanded beyond that, then it's just weird to go back for a second approval. If what we're trying to do is define our budget right now, our proposal for our budget, then I would certainly like to see that shifted. So we're not going to ask for it later.
I don't disagree. I just think that it carries more weight if there's a project attached to it just versus let's just stick it in that
understood.
budget.
It will.
So I think what we could do is just ask council to say, hey, look, EDA is, has new tracks in their budget, but there's a discussion that if a fantastic, economic development project comes forward in 19, is the council at least open to having a discussion about cost participation in new tracks or potential funding of that EDA initiative, if they can't be found within existing dollars, because that keeps, again, you don't want to set it up where all of a sudden EDA every year is getting $53,000 and not spending to that amount every year. It's going to be pretty tough to keep going back through and saying, we're recommending a $53,000 budget, but we're only spending, a significant less amount of money than that every year.
Well, and, it was just a couple of years ago that our budget had a significant increase in it. I think we were at like 36 or 38 before.
Yep.
So it's not like we've been struggling with, trying to keep 53 under cap. We had a significant increase with thought ahead of time that, we're gonna be able to use this money for downtown incentive or for, some other things. So, without really having, specifics of what else are we gonna spend the money on, yeah, if we cut out half of new tracks, it would, basically end up lowering our budget that much unless we have specific dollars in mind where we're gonna spend those. I do wanna get a clarification though, because if we're talking about the headwaters and turning that into a business park, engineering charges, legal services, are those charged back to the city or to the EDA? Because our budget is not that strong in those areas if we're gonna do something like that.
I guess it would be depending upon the specifics of what we're actually doing. You know, if it's engineering specific to that, I think that engineering amount would be more towards what we would put towards a Washington County grant match, is what we're looking at for that. On the legal side of it, I mean, we may get through the whole, you know, high level, you know, business park development there, it may not need legal services, you know. I guess I'd rather put something in there for the potential for legal services and all of a sudden get caught out with some other big legal issue that comes and hits the EDA that needs to get, you know, addressed. I mean, I guess one option I can talk to Hannah about too is I know in the past for parks at the end of the year, you know, they did allow for whatever wasn't spent to get put into the next year's budget and carried over. There was a resolution that was passed that allowed that to happen one time, just because, again, the funding levels in the EDA are, they're new this year. You know, we've kind of spent the first part of the year kind of developing how we were gonna spend them, you know, people, good stewards of that money. And basically kind of, it would address some of that unknown issue is like, basically we can say, we came in way under budget in 18, let's take some of those excess funds and go into 19 kind of bolstered up, you know, with some, you know, so what 19 would have a little bit higher budget line item in there, and then if we come in again low, now we have 2 years to kind of go back to and see where we are, and then compare it back to the, kind of the work plan at that point, and then adjust from there, because again, the numbers this year, there is a significant increase in it, but again, our expenses are still relatively low, but we've also spent quite a bit of time developing how that money is gonna get spent, so we're not just kind of just chasing whatever program comes in through the front door. So I think that could be a potential ask, is that instead of, as a percentage of what we've come under budget, could that be pushed forward to the next year's budget? This is a one-time kind of cash infusion to help, you know, get through 19.
And that's how it sets up, is just like a needed one-time proposition. It can't be a general ongoing.
I mean, what happened, again, though, if you are constantly coming in under budget, you know, your numbers are too high then, you know, so you could get to a certain point if you're able to reserve it. So I guess what happened in parks was that it was a one-time, they took, I can't remember what the numbers were, but let's just say for you know, in theory, let's say the EDA budget in 18, we come in at $30,000. So there's $23,000 that's left in the budget that wasn't spent. You could say to the council, can we allocate this $23,000 to the 19's budget? Because we think now that we're on a 12-month work plan versus a 6-month work plan, we're gonna have some increased expenses. You know, and then that gets allocated, and then we reevaluate mid-season to see where we are in context of that. And we could find out that even by kind of putting all these new initiatives in place, that $53,000 is, you know, plenty of money for the EDA. I think at this point, that's a little bit kind of unknown at this point.
Well, still, my basic theory is Economic Development Authority can do a whole lot of things we're not talking about that would generate economic development. There could be outreach, there can be all sorts of things. I have no fear of us spending a budget if we found good things to spend it on that aren't necessarily right in these categories, but can be really beneficial. We've got to reach out developers in a certain kind of category because we have that land available. That kind of outreach could become something. So I just honestly, if you're very, very effective as an EDA, you will find positive things to do with that money.
Well, I think we just gotta go out and be intentional and purposeful in what we're doing.
Yep.
And I think that's what you're saying, but I think what he's saying also is, you know, if we continually cut and not spend that money, it's gonna go away.
Sure.
I mean, and, you know, we could do another CDA grant, I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do. I think we just have to be intentional and purposeful is what we're pursuing. And I think you're absolutely right, there is a lot of things we can do, but are we doing those? You know, I think that's really the question. Are we all going out there and doing those things that we're talking about? And I'm going to say the answer is probably no.
Yep, I agree.
I hate to say it that way, but.
And I think part of it though too is that, you know, the work plan, you know, it's only, you know, it's still relatively new. It's a couple of months old. We're starting to get that, you know, those things moving forward. And, you know, again, I would probably have a little bit different, you know, spin on this if we weren't able to fund some of those number of initiatives that came out of there. Now, some of the other ones too had to be determined on that. We don't necessarily know what those numbers are going to be, you know, for, you know, say filling vacant spaces downtown. We don't necessarily know what that's going to look like at this point. But it's also one of those things where it's probably not fair to say that's gonna be about $3,000. We have no idea what that cost is gonna be, because we have no program to really market against, but if we had a number saying, other cities spend, they put this program in there, it costs them $6,000, and they reduce rental rates, rental vacancies by X, that's something that's a number then, but we're not there right now. It's still to be determined, and, we're still kind of working through a couple of these work plan items. And I think the key is that now that we have the work plan, we should focus on getting some of those things done to kind of start, it's momentum. Once you get momentum going somewhere, other things will kind of get in line. I think we're just kind of starting to get momentum in a good direction, on the board, and have a course. Like, I'll be honest, putting the budget together by having the work plan, I kind of knew that then the budget items would match up with what the ED had kind of discussed. So it was a lot easier than in past years. You're kind of going, I know we discussed all these things, and you're trying to go back to a year's worth of meetings, and you're trying to remember all the ideas that came forward. Here we kind of had a plan that would have been discussed, voted on, has some numbers to it to start as a starting point. And even though it's just a starting point, we can still make adjustments as we go through 19.
I'd sure like to see some sort of a buffer in there that where you can shift money around. I mean, we're not talking about huge amounts of money. We're just not. And it seems to me there needs to be some flexibility there in order to, in case something does come up.
So I guess at this point, I what I've kind of heard in summary is basically some conversation regarding the new tracks funding, is one that was kind of bring that forward to council to say, is there any appetite for cost participation in new tracks? But, I guess I don't want to misspeak when I present that, are you guys comfortable saying that cost participation comes if we find a program that basically can take up some of that difference, where it's not just cost participation for the sake of cost participation, it's for, that would be balanced out with an incentive program or a program that actually, we would need a budget, kind of a one that, it'd be the unknown project at this point that we don't know.
That's what I would say, because, as looking at it from the council standpoint, it's coming out of the city's money. Either way, you're putting in one side or the other, but it's not a cost savings to the city. But yet, if you transfer it out, what are you doing with that money that's still in your budget? You're just shifting the responsibility. We're not changing it. And really, until we get some data back from new tracks, I've heard a lot of positive. They're getting really good ridership on it, and so I've heard a lot of good things. I think for extremely limited investment in it compared to trying to develop something, we'd be looking at $250,000 plus, and plus an employee to do it and everything else. That it's really per dollar, I think, one of the better programs we've tried recently. But let's get the ridership data, and maybe we get comparisons to what they've been seeing in White Bear as well. But I've heard nothing but good about it anyway.
Does the city of White Bear fund their entire program?
I don't think that they fund the entire thing, but I'm not sure. It was a
But this
partnership
dollar
with
amount funds the whole thing. And so I thought we had conversation about that initially we would fund it, but then let's look at partnerships. And, because to me, it's,
Right,
definitely a
and
community
I think the other
service.
conversation we had was, get the data back, but it was 1 day a week, and I think the talk was it's very successful, and if we'd expand it to, multiple days a week, of course, then the additional expenses, and where are we gonna get those from? And so, I don't believe that, it's really cutting out from the EDA, but how do we expand the program if it so fits? Where's the rest of the money gonna come from?
And I think just on that point too, with the new tracks discussion, it could come back and say October that, the numbers aren't matching up, ridership numbers aren't, we're not seeing the investment that's, justifies 18,000 at that point. The contract for new tracks expires at the end of the year, so we have to re-sign that contract for 19. So even that number's budgeted in there, there could be that potential if we're not doing new tracks in 19. At least we have a placeholder for it in 19's budget, so if we want to continue doing it, we have it there. If it comes back and ridership is just, we're spending a lot of money for not a lot of ridership, then we could take that 18,000 and say, okay, then at that point, maybe put that into the program.
Yeah, the thing of it is, it all comes from the same pot.
If the city
And
pays for
just-
it all.
Yeah, either way. And so it just seems to me that it should be on our budget so we have some control over it, where we don't have to go to the council and ask for it. That's my opinion on it.
And I guess that's the ledge I'd like to stand on as well. I mean,
Yeah. Because,
if there, the ability to subcategorize these things, you could put an asterisk by it, say, undue proportion to EDA for the ridership should be available for consideration, something. I don't know how to word these things, but I'm just looking for our total budget in this particular group doing its particular thing to somehow have a reserve. That means that I'm tending to pack something else like the CDA with, you know, another 2,000 and pack something else with another a bit, so that at least we're taking something out of it and then very legitimately asking to come out of another pocket. I know you're all saying it's just the city pocket, but no, it's, the EDA's got a pocket.
Well, I think it's, you know, if ridership's up, I think it's, you know, we might be all on the same page that it's a good program, I mean, for the dollars, and you're providing a service, but the question I think is debatable, is this what an economic development authority should be doing?
Exactly.
That's, I think, the question, so, I think until we get some information on ridership and that, it's tough to even, we have till September, I mean, I know you wanna kind of move this forward and give them council some direction as to where we're at, but it's not like we're sitting here saying we want $10,000 more than we spent last year. I think we're fine with the budget numbers, it's just a matter of what we're gonna do with them, which we don't really know.
And I think that point too, if you look at new tracks, I mean, the actual budget, I just put that in there as a notes file, so I knew why that 18,000 was there, you know, it's kind of a guiding note, but it's actually under contract services, so, you know, I mean, that contract services is pretty extensive, what you could put into contract services. Could it be a consultant coming in to do work? Absolutely. Could that be, you know, another type of project that gets launched? So if new tracks does go away, if it doesn't meet the numbers, with that 18,000, and now you have 18,000 to potentially go, you know, but those are some of the decision points that the EDA would have then, is like, okay, are we better off supporting ridership from an economic development standpoint, or, you know, some other program? But I think as a placeholder, I mean, you just don't want to get caught in 19, all of a sudden you want to do new tracks and take another, you know, consultant servicing on, and all of a sudden now you have, so the $25,000 of the liabilities and your revenues haven't come up to account for that.
Well, and New Tracks is taking people to local businesses, and that's,
Big box
Big
stores.
businesses, so.
They are not,
they're dropping them in different locations too.
they're all pretty big box. And I feel like we've dedicated a lot of airtime to new tracks, and I don't know that it's exactly promoting economic development in the city of Forest Lake.
There'll be ridership, and there'll be how much per ridership is actually expended or invested in the community. And that'll be a total number, if that can be assumed in some fashion, and that'll tell us whether it even comes close to $18,000 a year, you know.
And I don't know that we really care about the money thing, because it is a fantastic service. I just feel like the EDA has spent a lot of time on it, and we've got other things to talk about as well.
But I think too is, I mean, on the new track side too, it's not just probably what the money expended out versus what you get per ridership, but it's also that allows that resident to stay in Forest Lake, so they're housing here, there's electricity here, there's food here.
It's
So
a
I mean,
great service.
there's a
The
lot
social
of,
side is
It's a
no
great
challenge.
service.
right, yeah, and so I think there's probably, but that's a pretty in-depth study that would need to be performed by that to kind of get to that actual number, but there's a lot more kind of intangibles just beyond, I'm going to store X and spending $10 per time I go out, you know, I mean, there's a lot more that resident brings in based on this one service here.
So is this $2,271 what we've spent so far?
Correct.
Is that up to date, or
I would-
it seems like we would be a little behind on that?
Yeah, my guess is that this report was pulled at the beginning of July, so that's probably encompassing first run of bills from June, so we're probably a little bit behind. I mean,
That 30.
that year-to-date, don't get too beholden to it, because it's just kind of a guide to say, hey, about mid-year, we're sitting about, you know, you kind of do just the rough back of the napkin match, say, oh, we X percentage of budget, because some of these line items, certain other budget items will be higher, so then you gotta take a look at why was it higher, and, you know,
Right.
but.
Okay.
So if we let this stand today and don't put in those caveats that we're talking about here, then we're just simply stuck actually going back to city council and hoping they honor whatever we feel we honor. If this group said unanimously we want to do something, we have just simply a hearing is what we're going to have at the city council level.
I think you go back to council and say, we're comfortable with $53,000 for budget for 19. You know, we feel that there's no programs at this point that we know of that are gonna basically go off above and beyond that budget. That being said, you never know what's gonna come in, but, I think this budget is realistic in the fact that it does allow for, a little bit of decision points. It doesn't guarantee, so the other thing too, it doesn't guarantee funding of everything that comes through the door. I mean, you have to do some analysis work on A or B, here, but it allows for, if you're trying to do A, B, and then all of a sudden C comes in, you have a little bit of extra funding in that budget through different items to get C to go, so I think that's the ask, is basically the EDA is comfortable with, we can get the work that's done in our work plan started and in a good spot, where you're gonna demonstrate that investment was well spent, that there are some results that can come back to council, that the residents coming in saying, what was this money spent on? You can show them, a good result as a result of that expenditures in this budget item.
All right. Any other comments on the budget? Are we okay with leaving it at 53?
I wish I had a premise to say it should be more. The premise is the unknown.
Well,
That's
this
the
isn't,
problem with budgets.
this isn't gonna set it in stone. This is the first view of it as well. We'll be revisiting it once or twice more at least, right, Dan?
Well,
Yeah.
and that study will help, though. It really will, I think.
So if we're gonna do a placeholder, how about 60,000? Then, we can always go back, but can't get further.
Well, without knowing, I guess, where that extra money's going for, I mean, we're looking at, we took a significant hike. It was 2 years ago, or last year, I can't remember what it was, but
Maybe last year.
it was almost a 50% increase. So I guess I would like to know where the money's going, because it looks like right now we're gonna have a surplus this year.
Yeah, I'd anticipate, just kind of based on the fact that a lot of time has been spent kind of getting work plan together versus actually, we're in the planning stage, not the execution stage. Planning stages aren't always as expensive as the execution stages are, so as we move into the execution stage, those expenses are gonna go up. Now, where we are in a year, we're halfway through the year and our budget's significantly lower, and I think it's hard to kind of go in and ask for $7,000 more when, if that's granted, if that's allowed, and you want to get rid of Nutrac, that's potentially $15,000 that's unfunded at this point. There's no program to basically pick up that slack. And, again, if you wanted to look at 19 as kind of the year that we kind of at least do we're in the action step, we're executing on the deliverables in this work plan. If we're able to get some of the 18 surplus applied to 19, then there's our buffer, kind of baked into the 19's budget, and then do another review of it, because I just, it's kind of hard to keep going back asking for additional funds, but you're not seeing the return on those funds. If you look at it from an investment standpoint, you want to demonstrate back to council and the residents that that money is well spent.
At any rate, you could take $6,000 more, whatever it takes to get to 60, and you could add 2 to the CDA grant, and certainly we've already talked about projects that could be considered for that. You could do 2 projects in downtown and assign money for that, and you would have covered easily that $6,000, and you've held it within this thing called the EDA.
Well, I guess we've got a couple months here. I mean, if we really, it's on us to go looking for something then. If we think we
Make
need
a
more
plan.
money, I
Let's
think
make a
we need to
plan.
go try to find something, if it's a grant or something. I know that the Hool property that David Rocci was possibly looking for for a study there. I mean, maybe that's stuff that we need to justify and make, if we decide we want to do that, then if we don't have enough in that budget, then we have to ask for that 60 or whatever that number is. So maybe it's on us, I think, at this point, to really look for that.
Yeah, because there's still downtown incentive money in that budget that hasn't been tapped yet, so.
We have I mean, I think what you're saying is we have time to, if we want to ask for more. I mean, I think right now we just move forward where we're at. And if we find something, then we can come back and ask. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. But that window is gonna close quickly. I mean,
Yeah, end of August, we got to get the budget soon. There's some time on there, but again, it's one thing to say it's about this much. I think there's enough kind of excess in this budget. There's enough maneuvering that can happen to allow for another project to get picked up. And I think also from the realistic standpoint, and kind of going back to, the work plan, there's a lot of work in that work plan. We start diving into the step levels of it, and I think one of the frustrations that was expressed before by the EDA was we develop these plans, we never follow through on them, and I think it's, we either got to kind of execute on this work that's here, or we're chasing kind of the next thing and never really gaining traction. And, you know, I think as we start to get some of the successes of this work plan under our belt, we'll start to really see where those needs are. Those needs will kind of become apparent. And there is some funding in here to allow for that. But, you know, at this point, you know, I'd feel pretty confident if you went back in and said, you know, 53 with, you know, maybe your potential, you know, inside the budget line item buffer is that new tracks. If you can get cost participation on the new tracks, you know, I mean, you look at $10,000 coming in there, 9,000 and change coming back, and that's a lot of study that can happen, you know, and you want to make sure that that study's done for the right reasons, not just to do another study.
But what if we just set a goal at $60,000 as a request at this moment, and we as a group come forward before any deadlines in August, and we recommend conceptual uses of those money without it being a specific, it's going to be building A on site A. Uses for that extra money. Would that fit still back into some category like miscellaneous and or otherwise? We would at least put definition to it, and then there'd be a justification behind the 60, and we'd have 60 versus 53 something. Am I being trivial here?
Well, I mean, I think it would help. I think that the part of the issue is here is that, I mean, it's the end of July, and, you know, you've spent, out of 53,000, you spent a little over 3,600, you know, so you have quite a bit of cash, you know, sitting in there right now, you know, which, you know, if that project is gonna happen in 18, why don't you just fast track it in this, or still go in 19, focus the back half of 18 on it, you got a surplus in 18, you could launch something in December under 18's budget, you know, kind of like the buy local campaign. You push it off in 18, you overfund it in 18 and get everything kind of teed up. That project requires no more funding in 18. There's $5,000 out of an 18 budget right there.
Okay.
I would just hate for them to dive in too far and say, you haven't even spent this much money, and then, yeah, you don't even think you need that much.
Has staff, or the department heads, is there a number of an increase percentage-wise of the overall city budget that's kind of floating out there yet, or?
We haven't, like, we're still getting all the pieces together, you know, on this, you know, so we haven't really come to a conclusion of exactly where that number is going to be. Most of what we're seeing is a lot of it's kind of, you know, there's a couple of things that we're shifting, you know, kind of simplifying some line items. So there's going to be some inter-fund shifting that happens. So instead of having, say, you know, phones go to 7 different departments, it's all going to go under one bill because it's all billed under one bill. So just some streamlining there. But overall, I don't know what the budget number is going to come in at.
Right. Any other questions on this topic?
So using last year's city budget numbers, what percentage does the EDA get out of the total city budget?
Oh, it's relative, it's
Minimal.
low, it's pretty minimal, yeah.
Pretty
It's
minimal.
really low.
Pretty minimal.
But again, I think the increase on that is if, you know, I mean, if it's an established track where the EDA is bringing quality projects forward with the funding, it's easy to ask versus basically, we just want money for the sake of, you know, nothing behind it. So you gotta have that quality behind that. So you're seeing that return back on that investment that's made at this level.
Okay, so do we need a vote or anything?
Nothing.
No, I think I got enough to kind of go back to the, council and say, here's kind of what the summary of it is. And, you know, the major point on there is the new tracks and then the potential for, you know, as we enter execution phase or action steps on some of these, that funding could shift potentially 19. So we'll see what we can do about doing a one-time transfer from 18 to 19 to kind of build that buffer in there.
All right. Any other questions on the budget for now? Move on to the buy local campaign discussion. Dan, do you want to take us in on that?
Yep, present members of the EDA, kind of was in line with the budget a little bit, was that as part of the work plan that was developed, it was one of the pieces was the development of a buy local campaign. Pretty high level discussion when you established a buy local campaign. So I kind of looking for a little direction from the EDA, some feedback as just to kind of what the EDA would like to see in a buy local campaign. One thing that we did was we actually looked out to other cities and kind of see what they're currently doing for their buy local programs. One thing as we kind of go through here is some of these examples aren't necessarily driven by the EDA. They're kind of driven by either the Chamber of Commerce or another kind of local group of businesses. But I just kind of wanted to get a flavor for what's out in the marketplace right now for shop local campaigns or buy local campaigns. Kind of looked at just all over the country just to kind of see which ones kind of had some strong established ones. One of them that we pulled was Portland. They have a website that's basically dedicated to all small businesses, and it also shows some of the importance of buying local. There's all kind of the fact set of what a dollar spent locally does versus a dollar spent at like a bigger box retailer. One of the component of their website was they actually did a map here where they actually geo-referenced all of the different buy local or the different businesses that are participating in the buy local campaign. So somebody shows up in Portland, they know on their website where they can go get X, Y, or Z. They're categorized. So if you're looking for food, you can kind of go get, different food options. Another one was Seattle. In Seattle, what Seattle did was Seattle actually kind of took it down to the next level, was they actually did 2 separate programs. One of them was Dine Around Seattle, where again, they did a little bit more focus on restaurants and dining activities. And then they also focused on what products are actually made in Seattle, like with some of the local craft retailers that are present in Seattle. Again, another component of it is they have kind of the stats on what's being produced in the city, and again, some of the economic benefit that's there. They also do some pop-up markets, which the city holds on dates during the holiday season to kind of encourage residents to shop local in Seattle. Kind of coming a little bit closer to home, we looked at Duluth. Duluth has kind of launched, kind of a new buy local campaign. One thing that they actually focus on is they actually have a pass, kind of like a passport, where you go to the different businesses downtown and that are participating, get your stamp on the passport. They also have a website with information on where to buy local, has some other information on what Duluth has to offer, and then showcases some small businesses. And again, that's all kind of back-ended with the actual passport. And again, some of these programs, I mean, this is just kind of an overarching view. Some of these things to actually implement will require quite a bit of additional staff time to kind of monitor these. I just kind of wanted to get a flavor out there for what is available. St. Paul has their own buy local as well. They focus a little bit more on the brochure side of the marketing aspect. And here you kind of have the example, kind of a more traditional, the importance of buying local, kind of getting that, those facts known out in the community of why you want to buy local. It shows where the consumer's money is going. It also wants you to keep your money where your heart is. But also as part of that, they also have a website where they do some featured listings. You can kind of see it down here in the corner where they actually kind of show, where to go for farmers markets, other, local businesses in St. Paul. We kind of also just did a very high level look at what's existing in Forest Lake. This is probably not, I wouldn't call this a scientific study. What we ended up doing was went back to the Chamber of Commerce website and just kind of looked at participation in the Chamber of Commerce and tried to get at least a starting point for some of the metrics that we're kind of seeing in Forest Lake for types of businesses. So the Chamber currently lists 353 businesses, and then based in the top categories as they have them categorized. So you have 37 in the shopping category, 32 in the professional, 27 healthcare and financial services is 21. So you're kind of seeing that it is kind of spread over. One of the reasons why we did this was just to kind of see, at first blush, kind of finding an easy data set, what is available in Forest Lake, and you are kind of seeing kind of a good variety of different businesses that could be promoted. The Chamber of Commerce also kind of has their own Keep It Local campaign that they're working on. So I guess what we're kind of looking for is, buy local campaign is a pretty broad topic to address. I'm kind of looking for, just some initial discussions on, what the goals of that campaign would be. Also looking at some of the establishment of feedback metrics. So we're looking at what would the success of that program look like. So we have an ability to kind of go back and say in 6 months, are we meeting our target? Are we actually hitting that metric? Also a target audience, because the way you would market that would be different to local residents versus regional versus visitors coming from out state. A local resident, you wouldn't necessarily need to give them kind of turn-by-turn directions to get to a store versus somebody coming from out of state, you're going to have to direct them here. So there's a little bit of difference in how that marketing would look like. Also additional, what type of campaign do you want to focus on, print, digital, or a combination of both? And then where are the partnership opportunities exist in Forest Lake? One, potentially would be with the Chamber of Commerce with their Keep It Local campaign. I know in the past there's been discussions on, there's been some discussion like on an app development for, the city of Forest Lake. And I have found some apps that would meet the criteria for allowing for public funds to be expended or used on them. They're basically just a general app that businesses themselves could put their own information on. So we're not necessarily, you don't have to pay to play type thing. It's any business in Forest Lake could say, I want a list, I want to put my specials on there. So it's kind of done at the business level community, because one thing to keep in mind when you do a local campaign, especially if it's got public money attached to it, is that it's got to benefit all businesses. Like, we couldn't do something specific that only benefited chamber businesses. This would have to be, you know, full citywide. It has to benefit everybody in here. So with that, this is just kind of what we're looking for, kind of starting that process to help guide if we're going to expend $5,000, where those expenditures should kind of go in a buy local campaign.
One thing I noticed on your examples, the St. Paul or Twin Cities one, is it's a Twin Cities Metro Independent Business Alliance. Can we reach out to them to see if there's potential for a membership or partnership there? They've got a nice brochure, they've got a lot of stuff put together that we've been talking about already, so might be a way to go instead of recreating the wheel.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
I don't know, this one I continue to have difficulty with, mainly because I've been through 2 test cases, and they were pretty extensive. One certainly involved the chamber, 2 banks, 2 local papers that overlapped, and a series of businesses that thought they could stimulate something as well. My company being one of them that thought it's great for us to get out and know everybody in this particular retail or and service area. It's good for us to continue to know them and go back to them a number of times. So for heaven's sakes, we invested 5 to 10 and others invested and went through this whole process, and part of it was going back to talk to them 2 different times after a certain period of time of incentives and publication and all the rest. And the general takeaway was it didn't change the response. It didn't change who came. Those who know local, find local. Can you go in through a chamber outreach and say, here's our local business, and keep advertising that we have these special places and things? But honestly, twice, Roseville and Highland Park, and the response with a fairly intense effort was, it didn't much make any difference. So I'm stuck right there. I need to be sold from that point.
Judy, you've had some experience with like the boomerang, right?
I know quite a bit about boomerang.
What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it takes a 15-minute to half an hour presentation, which we don't have time for that. But the concept of keeping those dollars within the businesses, the participating businesses, there is a cost to the business, but if you have no buy-in from the businesses, free has no value to them either. And the way it keeps boomeranging back around those same dollars, so when you spend $1 at Walmart, it goes down south. When you spend $1 within a boomerang business, and then that keeps boomeranging around amongst the other participating businesses, it's really quite an amazing concept. The technology, having the app, talking about print materials, I've just gone, oh my gosh, get in the 21st century. Because you could spend a lot of money having it printed at someplace, and it's not gonna get used, but an app on your phone, they're gamifying shopping, which is a big thing right now, is gamifying like everything. And so I think there's a lot of validity in having a program such as that, so it's a rewards program, but you keep it all within the participating merchants. So I think it's a technology that would be worth exploring and really having, a presentation by, because Steve came and talked about it. But that was not very engaging as to how the app actually works and how it can benefit the businesses. So that's what I know.
All right.
I kind of agree with you on that, is, I think, geofencing, participating businesses, I think that would be great. I don't know if the app does that automatically or not, but.
It's amazing what the app does, and a lot of it just goes right over my head.
And if we have all these dollars that we're talking about in our budget, if you have participating business, that's something that we could help with,
Well, and I do like the fact that the businesses have to financially participate, but if there's nobody willing to facilitate that start, it's not gonna start with any type of impact. I mean, if you get 2 or 3 businesses to hook up with it, or sign up with Boomerang, but yet that
Well,
word doesn't get out around
There's,
the public.
there's so much to it, and I really should, you know, maybe I have too much of a vested interest to even be talking about it. I would encourage us to have somebody from Boomerang come in and talk about all the bells and whistles that they have, sending out notifications to other businesses that, hey, so-and-so requested that you be part of this program because they would like to spend their boomerangs, you know, there's a whole ton to it that I could not give it justice.
And I think that's one of the challenges, when we looked at that, and I did a little bit of diving into kind of the Boomerang and what, you know, how, is it eligible to have public dollars spent to it, you know, because that was always a question of that. And, you know, I think the idea is solid. I think the problem with it is that businesses have to pay to participate in that. So you're establishing, you know, you're kind of sponsoring, in essence, you're basically sponsoring a paid app that businesses have to be a part of, you know, and it kind of, to me, it's, you know, I think where the EDA's involvement, if you're trying to promote Boomerang, would basically tie that into something else, saying, you know what, we have a pretty active Boomerang community here, we can tie that in and help promote it. But I think it's also one of those things where, you know, by really putting a lot of dollars in the development of it, I think it's a little bit of a slippery slope in terms of, you know.
But see, by using an existing program, you're not putting any money into developing it. It's already developed. It was, you know, it's not recreating something, using something that already exists and applying it. And I have no idea about the city guidelines, but I know that there are lots of other programs out there that are already, somebody has already invested millions into the software.
Right. Well, you know, what I'm saying is that it's the gatekeeper of, like, if you, the app I looked at was basically open architecture. So anybody, if say EDA makes the investment in an app development, then any business could come in. There's no barrier to get in. You know, like, there was no cost to participate in it. So it basically raised all ships. There wasn't that barrier of, like, we made the investment and now to participate in what the city's already spent money on, you got to spend $15 a month. You know, that's where, it wasn't the development of the actual app, the technology that was there. It was kind of how it interfaced with the businesses. And what I'm saying is that you could promote it through the fact that, like, on a Keep It Local campaign, you could have a big Boomerang prominently featured on the website that links to the local Boomerang campaign that's going on as a second thing. That's a different story than, you know, members of the city walking out saying support Boomerang, because that's, you know, but then to support it, you got to spend an extra money on it. It'd be different if I went in
The
and say.
business does.
Right. It'd be different if I went in and say, we have a new app that's, you know, the city's getting involved to try to help georeference businesses, and there's no cost to participate. Give me your information. If you want to participate, there's no additional cost. It's free.
Didn't Steve come in to us a couple months ago for funding to help
Yeah,
businesses?
and he, yeah.
Yep, so this conversation is following up through that, and it's part of our work plan designation of, you know, getting a buy local program is,
But there is a cost to the business to sign up.
For the
And
business,
that's what he wanted.
I think what you will find is if the businesses just think somebody else is gonna pay and promote and do all the work for buy local, and they don't have to do anything, it's gonna self-destruct.
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved with some local campaigns before in the past too, where there was no barrier to cost participation. I was even involved, I did the design work for the business as part of this thing, and it was like, some of them didn't even want to participate in that. However, after a couple of those, you know, I did marketing brochures, and a couple of those got out, then all of a sudden, they started seeing some return on them. The next time it went out, everybody wanted to get on board, so it was kind of, and I think that's the key component of this, is if you want to look back, is establishing those metrics to see are we successful or not. Because if we establish metrics that we want to do X, and then we're not accomplishing that, we'd have to go back to the drawing board and say, how do we adjust this to get that to go, you know, to get a successful buy local campaign? Because I think part of it is, there's always a lot of desire on the beginning of it to get it going, but then when you actually have to do, and you're not seeing the results that you anticipate, but if you have a clear, I want to increase local businesses by 3% and market with something that's trackable. And then you can come back and say, website traffic, we want to increase businesses by 3%, and we can hit that metric, then all of a sudden you have, okay, we hit that one, now what's the next one? So I think that's the key component, is starting to kind of frame it up that way where we can actually see whether.
It's that tracking system that you're gonna pay somebody to do that.
Well, I mean, some of the stuff is if you did like a web-based
Anal-
one, the analytics are baked into that. They're baked into that.
Absolutely they are.
Yep.
And that's what I'm saying.
But I don't really
Already.
see anybody coming back to a web-based page, but, you know, an app on the phone and that's where Boomerang, you know, it would have the Boomerang would still have a local cover to it. I mean, it's the same app that they're using in 50,000 other communities, but it would be the Forest Lake cover on it, but you could-
Well, and I think
Analytics
that you
from
really
that.
want to engage the businesses, but you also want to engage your consumers.
Right.
And it's those consumers that are going to drive the businesses, drive business to the businesses, and then the businesses have to drive their consumers and engage their consumers. So it's a both and.
So for like the Boomerang, is there like a local page administrator then? Somebody that could collect that data of, you know, Boomerang generated $40,000 worth of transactions?
all their
All the analytics. will be-
Analytics, is that what you call it?
can pull up a chart at any time.
Yeah, well,
basically,
and
see
every
your analytics.
business can track what it's doing for
Right.
their specific business. That's part of what they're paying for.
And I even think kind of taking that, you know, so on the metrics side, if you wanted to put, you know, say you wanted to dovetail this with the Boomerang app, you build a website, buy a local website, you put all like the georeference stuff on it, but then you put a buy local link. You can easily track who clicked over on that to see, are we driving business to Boomerang? But if you were to put Boomerang on it, then you'd have to open it up for the other app that comes out too that has a similar thing, because again, you gotta create a fair marketplace, you know, you can't just.
Well, I think we can talk and talk and talk, but, and I'm sure there are lots of other programs out there, and I think that we need to have some hands-on, show us what you can do for us, versus us deciding without really knowing any of the specifics. I mean, we wave our hands.
So, I mean-
You know, Steve was fine, that was a start, but more specifics, this is how we, and let them put together a program and present it to us and say, this is what we could do for your buy local program.
They can do that right over the web, can't they, for the next meeting? I mean, we don't have to have a presenter right here.
Are you talking specifically for the Boomerang app? I mean,
Yeah.
Well,
Like a
or what
PowerPoint
other things have you looked into?
well, I mean, I think, I guess, you know, based on this, I mean, granted, I kind of went through a very broad brush stroke on this. I'm kind of hearing that potentially maybe leaning more towards the digital with some analytics behind and some metrics on there, and I could maybe drill down to the next level. What are some other governments that are specifically doing something in terms of like economic development / buy local? What do those programs look like? What do the websites look like? Compile that information, bring it back to kind of help start the conversation, and at least get some ideas. Like I know Roosevelt's got a pretty good EDA website out there right now that kind of encompasses a lot of this different, you know, stuff into one. So I can look at that and then maybe provide some back-end web analytics of what we potentially would be tracking, you know, as kind of that next point. So at least we have the digital piece, and if you want to do print, I mean, I'm always a proponent of the digitals, yeah, it's a big piece of it, but there's a huge market out there that doesn't have a computer. And you got to be cognizant of that and try to figure out how do you at least get print in front of that, you know, print in front of those people, so they're aware of the programs. So maybe I can kind of repackage this a little bit and based on this and try to get something back for the next meeting.
Sounds good.
Running out of time.
Yeah, we are running out of time, so I guess we should probably skip number 8. And will we move on to a quick update from Chris?
President Winnick and members, good evening. I just wanted to back up briefly to number 7 and let you know that Dan and I are continuing to work on the list of community assets, and that's something we'll bring back for the EDA's input and discussion at an upcoming workshop. But we are going to be putting together a draft list for you to review, and that's based on the strengths and opportunities analysis that we did about 2 meetings ago. So I'll keep you posted and keep working with Dan on that. The only other thing I want to update you on is that the CDA is exploring the possibility of applying for a federal grant. It would be 100% federally funded, no local match required. And we'd be looking at doing an analysis and an inventory of brownfields throughout the county, trying to find out where the brownfields might be and what level of contamination, if any, is present on those brownfields, and then potentially looking at opportunities to redevelop those into businesses or opportunities for redevelopment purposes. So I'll keep you posted on that. Those are my 2 updates, but I'd be happy to answer any questions for you.
Any questions for Chris?
Will you have, based on your looking into that federal grant, will you have a fairly good inventory of where the brownfields are and where they are relative to Forest Lake?
That's correct. Yep, our hope would be to start with an inventory. And so there's some pretty good information out there about where the sites could be, but we want to nail that down and actually put together a pretty good database and a list of where they are, and then actually go back and maybe start a phase 1 and phase 2 investigation using these grant funds to find out what's there. Of course, that would be as a partnership with the city and the landowners if they're interested. But it's just a really good way for us to, once we do identify where they're at, find out what level of contamination, and maybe it's an old gas station that has some petroleum spills or something to that effect. Let's find out what's there, and then we can dig in a little bit and try to find some additional grant funds to clean it up.
So this is something completely separate than like the 3M and funding?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for clarifying that, and that's a very good point. So this would be the smaller standalone sites that really there's an unknown responsible party for it, would not have anything to do with the 3M lawsuit at all.
Okay,
For asking.
well, that's good to hear. Any other questions for Chris? Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
If nobody has any other business, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.